Hello, FewCandy here, and welcome to the start of a brand new Planet Zoo Beginner's Guide series. This series is intended for those new to the game, but also those with some experience who perhaps want some further guidance and tips and tricks in terms of how to build a beautiful but also functional zoo. Now, I am a detailer at heart, but I also like the challenge of playing games, so we will be playing with franchise mode settings throughout this series, and it's intended for you to follow along if you so wish, or transfer any of the techniques into your own franchise version or sandbox zoo. So today we will focus on the basics like camera controls, laying paths and setting up a zoo to get to a point where it's making money. Then as the series progresses, we will move on to more advanced pathing and terrain techniques, better habitat design, and generally how to plan, build and manage a really realistic, beautiful and functional zoo. So when you first open Planet Zoo, you were met with a number of different menu options to choose from. So you have got career, which is essentially scenarios that you can work through. And as a beginner, I'd really recommend doing some of these so that you can learn the basics of the game that way. However, we will be covering everything within this series, but there are some really fun ones in there. And you can pick up some nice detailing inspiration from some of those zoos as well. There are also time scenarios if you fancy racing against the clock. And then we come on to the three main game modes. We've got franchise, challenge, and sandbox. So Sandbox is essentially a completely free and open world. You can choose what settings you have, so how rigid you have to be to the animals' requirements in terms of their habitats and the space that they need or the foliage that they need within their habitat. And you can also choose whether to play with money or without money and be completely free in everything that you do within your zoo. Franchise mode is essentially the main challenge mode, so you are playing online and trading your animals with everyone else across the globe. But it can be quite tough to start because you are limited on money and conservation credits to get those animals, so it's not uncommon to go bankrupt when you first start a franchise zoo, and that is what I'm going to talk you through how to avoid today. Challenge is exactly the same as franchise, however it's just offline, so if you don't fancy buying really expensive animals from people being a bit cheeky around the world, then you can go into challenge mode and trade your animals against a computer UI. Now, full disclosure, I'm actually playing on Sandbox, but all of my settings are going to be identical to franchise, and the only reason why I'm playing on Sandbox is because I get control over the weather and the time of day so that I can make some really nice visual graphics for you as we go through this series. I don't want it to be raining 24/7. So let's get started. So I am going to be playing on a temperate biome in the North America continent. I like this one. You can get a little snapshot of what it might look like when you look in here. So you can see if you go through a grasslands, it's that kind of biome. Desert, you're getting lots of big hills. Tropical's gorgeous if you fancy that. You get lovely mountainous regions, and it does change depending on where you are in the world as well, I would add. So it's pretty exciting that way. Yeah, we're going to go for temperate and North America. We'll leave it on medium difficulty. If you go for hard difficulty, it just means that your visitors can ask for refunds if they're not happy, which can be pretty challenging to deal with. And then in terms of terrain type, there's a number of different options. The main ones you want to worry about as a beginner are flat and sculpted. So you could go for a sculpted option, but it's going to be quite challenging as a beginner because it can be completely random. You could get a giant volcano in the middle of your map and then you have to try and build around it, which isn't always ideal. So I'd recommend as a beginner you go for flat, and you can sculpt the terrain however you want to. So that's what we're going to be doing here. And then we're going to give our zoo a name. So I'm just going to call this Few Zoo for now. But I'd love to hear your suggestions on what we should name this zoo. So please drop your suggestions into the comments below. If you like Few Zoo, we can stick with it. But if you've got better suggestions, do let me know. So let's create our zoo. And in franchise mode, that menu will look slightly different. You'll have to spend 100 conservation credits in order to create your first zoo within your franchise. You can create multiple zoos within one franchise as well, and you can share all your research and conservation credits across all of those zoos. So that's quite a useful fact to know. So we have just landed in our zoo and we've got $40,000 in the bank and 200 conservation credits, which is exactly what you'll have when you first start a franchise zoo or a challenge mode zoo. So let's start by having a little look at settings. So we go to the settings menu in the top right, choose settings, and then in game you will see all of these options here. Now, really importantly, I do want to change the reduced animal aging rate. So it's always default of 1, but I find when it's on 1, if you have lots of animals in your zoo, animals die and are born far too quickly, and you end up with overpopulation, and it becomes a pretty difficult job to manage, to be honest. If you're up for the challenge, leave it on. But also I become quite attached to some of the animals, so I like to put this actually up to the maximum of 5, which means they'll just live longer. And because I spend quite a long time detailing up the zoo, this helps with the management aspect as well. I have also disabled all of these collision options here as well, which just helps when it comes to detailing to give you extra functionality and better control over how your habitats look. So I'd kind of recommend doing the same, but again, that's up to you. If you are playing on Sandbox as well, you can see there's a whole host of options in terms of your animal and guest settings here. So you could turn off all animal welfare and make sure that they're 100% happy all of the time, regardless of if they've got the worst habitat in the world that doesn't meet any of their needs. You can do that all here in animal settings. But of course, we're playing as if we were on franchise mode, so everything is as you would expect on franchise mode. So when you have changed some settings, you need to remember to hit apply, and I'll get this warning about the animals aging slower. It takes increased time for them to mature, gestate, and increase their star rating. Yes, I'm fine with that because I spend so long detailing, but you may want to go somewhere in between as a beginner. Let's click OK, and then we'll click OK and go back into our zoo. So before we do anything, we do want to hit the pause button in the bottom right of your screen there. You can also hit spacebar on your keyboard as a shortcut. The game always launches in play mode, and as soon as you start placing stuff, it's going to start costing you. So I'd really recommend trying to remember to do that when you start. Now, in terms of camera controls, I have got edge scrolling turned off. Otherwise, you can just move your mouse around if you have that on, and that will move the screen. I use W, A, S and D on my keyboard to move forwards, backwards and side to side. And also one really useful thing to know is Q moves you down and E moves you up, and you will want to use those, trust me. You can also use your middle mouse button to sort of free look around like this. But if I demonstrate the Q and E functions, if we go in here, I'm scrolling in with my middle mouse button to zoom in, and it won't let me go inside this building. So I hit Q and I go down, and then I can see inside here and then move around with the W, A, S and D keys. One other trick is if you right click and hold with your mouse button and drag the screen, you can move around like that, which is nice and simple. And you may want to adjust your settings in the camera settings menu to reduce or increase the sensitivity as you need. But that is essentially the main camera controls. So when you start a franchise zoo, you always start with this entranceway here, and this can look different. So if you're in the Asia biome, you get a slightly different, fancier Asian themed building, for example, but this is what we've got for North America. So coming inside these buildings, we can see we've got these plates here. These are guest spawn points. You don't really need to worry about it, but it's just so that you know that they are there. This is where the guests come from. When they enter your zoo, they walk through these gates and out into your zoo. Now these are the entrance ways, so this is where your ticket pricing is. You can click on these and you can see your ticket pricing from here. It'll always start at £3. I would suggest leaving it alone for the time being, because until you've got any decent animals in there, you can't really up the price, but we will go through that in a future episode. The other thing to be aware of here as well is zoo opening hours. Now I'm in Sandbox, so I can freeze the time with this function here if I click on the time here, but you don't have that in franchise. So if you don't want it to go dark in franchise mode, you do need to adjust your zoo opening hours so it's only daylight hours, and that won't actually affect anything other than the fact that it won't go dark. Obviously if you don't mind it going dark, then leave it. But the times you'll need to adjust it to will depend on what continent you're in, so it may be earlier or later depending on what continent you have chosen to have your zoo. So just have a play around with that and you'll get the hang of it. Okay, so let's start building a zoo. Now, just before we begin, I want to make you aware of these heat maps that we have in the bottom left corner of our screen. So if you click on this button here, you will see you've got various different options at the top, and we will go through these as the game goes on. But for now, we're just going to focus on this power one here. So the starting spawn area comes with a power source. And that is a really valuable thing when you are starting a franchise zoo, because you can place in more power sources around your zoo, and you obviously need these to power anything which needs electricity, surprisingly. Like all of your guest buildings, staff buildings, any educational boards or streetlights and the such like. And you can get more around your zoo as time goes on, but they do cost an awful lot to run at the start of the game. So we really don't want to do that until we're in a position where our zoo's making money. So ultimately, we are limited to building within this space here. So to turn the heat map off, you just click again down in the bottom left corner of your screen there. And as well, you will see when you hover over all of these, there are hotkeys for it. So you could just click H on your keyboard and that will bring up your various different heat maps. So in order to start our zoo, what we want to have is at least one animal habitat in there, and that should start generating enough money for us to then kind of be a little bit more creative about the zoo. So how I like to start my franchise mode zoos is kind of with a dummy habitat area. because I don't actually like to always immediately build right out of the entrance square here, which of course you can do if you want to do that. I'm going to go for a slightly more creative start. So first things first, we're going to start laying a path down, and I'm going to create a little entrance area over here. So I'm going to ignore the fact that this is the actual entrance and create our own, which I think is a nice aesthetic. So I want this path to come out of here and curve round this way. So the path menu is down here in the bottom right. When you open that, you have 3 different options here. You've got path, queue, which is used for transport rides, again, which we'll touch later, and staff paths, which are used for staff areas. Guests cannot walk on these paths. So what we want is just a normal path. It's asphalt out here. If we did want to change this to any other different type, we'd just click on that, and then if you left click your mouse button, you can upgrade it. And you'll see all these different paths come with a slightly different curb edge to them as well. So again, if we change it to a marble edge, you can see that's a slightly different wood. We try and get away from this than those wooden planks that we've got there. But I think for the aesthetic I want to go for, I'm just going to go for a plain asphalt path. Now, one more thing to note is in the second settings menu here, there are lots of options for your paths, and really play around with these and get to grips with them. We will be going through all of these and talking through all of them as the series goes on, but we're just starting with basic functionality for this first episode. So I think the 2 key things to note here are curb on ground path, so that's what this wooden bar is. If I turn this off and start drawing in a path, so we'll go over here, you can see there's no curb on this. Now, one other thing, if you want to delete a path, so to place it, I'm just left clicking with the mouse button. If you want to delete it, you can right click with the mouse button, or you can hit delete path here and left click, or you could just simply undo as well. So that's how you get rid of the curb, and you might want to do this so that you can put your own decorations over it, and again, I'll show you that in future episodes or various other reasons. You could also put a railing on your ground path if you wanted to. So again, you can see we've got a nice fence here. And that railing will change based on the different style of path that you put down, so do consider that in terms of the aesthetic that you're wanting for your park when you lay these all out. But I am going to take off all of these actually for the purposes of this. I'm not going to have railing on ground path, and I'm not going to have curb on ground path either. So if we go back into the main settings for paths here, now because I've taken off the curb, I'm actually going to upgrade these, so I'm just going to left click on those and we'll get rid of the curb there so we can no longer see those wooden lines in the pathway here. Now from here you'll see paths usually default to a minimum width of 4 meters, which is honestly relatively small if you're going to have lots and lots of guests packing through this path, which you'll see as the game goes on. Now this entranceway is 8 meters wide, so I'm going to just adjust this distance, this width, to 8 meters. And then we will start building out from this pathway here. Now, paths are a really tricky beast in Planet Zoo. So again, like this episode, I'm just going to go over very basic functionality. We'll go over more detail as the series progresses. If I just drag over with my mouse, and I'm not pressing anything at the moment, you will see it snaps in at various different angles. So what we want to do is try and find the nice angle right out of it. And then we'll left click, and that gives us a connection to that existing path. Now at the moment as well, I've got angle snap on, so you'll see if I try and, I'm just again hovering with my mouse here, if I try and move it in any different direction, it snaps to 15-degree angles. So we could change that if we wanted to. If we wanted to up it to say 45, we could do that. So we can be very precise about our path movements, which make it really easy actually to build next to. I'm going to stick with 15. And I think we will stick with an angle snap for this purposes. We could of course take that off, and then we've got completely free movement to move across the map here. But let's keep it on for now. And the other function to notice as well is we can adjust the length. So we could do a really long section of path if we wanted to, like that. Or we'd just keep it short. I tend to keep it short really because it gives you slightly better control. So we've come out straight of here. Now, actually, for the purposes of what I want a little bit of interest. So I want a kind of curvy, tree-lined path which will lead people up to the main zoo entrance, which I'll create over here. So I'm going to just bend this round at 15-degree increments like that, and then I think we'll go straight from this point by 2 segments. Now, of course, let's just check again that this is all within our power heat map. So it's sometimes difficult to see paths, but if you zoom right in, it's much easier to see it. So let's just take that off. So this is well within our segment there, so we should be absolutely fine for this. Now, one other thing just to point out quickly with paths is if you hold the control button, you'll see that stops snapping. So whenever you click onto the path, it's always going to snap if your mouse is near a certain path until you go a particular distance away. But by holding control, we can then put in paths really close to each other if we wanted to, like this. Let go of control and then we can connect it in like that. So you could create some really nice path designs if you want to do it this way. But let's undo that for now. So you see, before we can think about getting any animals in, it says here that we must have at least one trade centre in our zoo. So what we need before we put in any habitats is some staff facilities. So we come to our facilities menu here, and we want to choose staff facilities, and then we get lots of different options within this. Now, you do get blueprints which come with it, so if you don't want to detail around it, you can plop in these. I would really not recommend doing this on franchise mode. So for example, you can see here this quarantine costs 5,065, detailed up already with its building elements on it. To buy the quarantine without detail only costs 4,000. So I would really honestly buy all of your buildings like this to start off with, and then once you start making money you could always delete them and use some blueprints. If you've got other DLC as well, we'll do some research later on which will unlock other blueprints from the other DLC, and you'll get a whole variety of ready-made staff buildings for you to place. But honestly, I think it's a little bit more creative to do the building yourself, but it just depends how you really want to play the game. So for this purposes, I'm actually going to go to this menu here and turn blueprints off so that I can't see them anymore, because we're not going to be using blueprints. I'm going to be teaching you how to do stuff. So if we leave this on the all menu, you can see we've got all staff buildings there. We can go into each and see the different types. As we do some research again, which I will explain later on in the series, we will unlock bigger and better staff buildings, but for now this is just what we start with. And we are going to need one of each of all of these buildings in our starting area zoo. And of course we do want to make sure that we're keeping it within that heat map, so I'm going to start placing them in over here, and we can always move it around if we need to. So I'm just going to start placing them in. Now you'll see when we place in a building, it comes with this little grid around it. And I would add that all of these buildings are multiples of 4 meters. So this is simply 4 meters by 4 meters. This is a 4 by 8, and this is an 8 by 8. So when you're placing paths, do consider that, because if you use multiples of 4 for your path widths, then you can get much nicer oriented path networks around some of your building elements. So that is something to consider. Let's come into the menu here and we can see what we've got. So we're starting off with a quarantine actually here. We've got angle snap on. So in order to place this, if I hold Z on my keyboard, I can move the mouse around. And because we've got angle snap, you'll see that is snapping to 15-degree angles. And this is a very useful feature because you'll see our path, as we snapped to those 15-degree angles, is perfectly lined up with this when we move it around to the different 90-degree angles here. So it's very useful for getting very neat detailing in if you keep that angle snap on. So I'm actually just going to, where's the door? I'm going to face it away from this path area. And we're just going to start placing this in. So we're going to make sure the back of it is lined up to the path on that same grid. And of course we can move these all round in a minute if we need to. As soon as we select a different building, so like the Animal Trade Centre, here you'll see it snapping into little 4x4 grid squares. So I just want to turn this around and make sure, yeah, we've got the door facing out this way. In fact, let's spin the camera around so you can see. So you can place this in however you want. If you did want to, for example, stack this on top of another staff building, you can hold Shift on your keyboard and that will auto snap it up to the top. But I think really for beginners, I would stick to them on the ground. Otherwise, you're going to have to produce some complex path networks in order to get your staff up to them. So let's place in the trade centre here, and we'll go through and place one of each of these buildings. So we've got a workshop there. We also need a veterinary surgery. And I think what I will do with this one is press Z and just flip this round. And what I'm doing here is making sure we've got rooms for pathways in front of all of the doors so we can create a nice staff complex. Let's just go ahead and place all of these buildings in a little grid. So there we go, we have got in our staff facilities here. Now you will notice when I've placed one of these down, so if I place another trade centre down, let's use this as an example, it says editing group 3. Now I'll just click exit on this and we'll click undo and get rid of that. If I come out of facilities here, if we just take our left mouse button and we click on one of these buildings, you can see it says quarantine small, and down here you have select group. So if we click that, that will select all of the buildings that are within this group. So when I've placed it down, so let's place a research centre, it's in the group, and now I'm adding this quarantine building to this same group. So what that means, let's get rid of that again, is when we go to this group, so let's select group, we can then move So we press M on our keyboard or press this button here, the entire lot of buildings around to suit wherever we want it. So for now, let's place them in here, and that will do quite nicely. Now, another thing to note with staff buildings as well is they have a negative effect on guests. So let's open our heat maps by pressing H on the keyboard or going down to the bottom left of our screen. And then we go to this graph with an arrow sign here which says negative impact on guests. If we click on that, you can see these big red circles around some of these. Now, the quarantine and the vet and the staff room actually has quite a big one because they're larger buildings. But some of the keeper huts and the research centres are actually not too bad. And if we put in building materials and construction and detailing around this, that area of negative effect becomes a lot smaller. But we do want to be aware of it because we really don't want any guest paths or any guests being able to walk into this area of negative effect because they will complain and that will reduce their happiness. And if you're playing on hard mode, they may then want a refund. So let's avoid that. Now, in order for our staff to access the staff area, we need to just extend our path up. So let's go ahead and do that by a couple of segments like so. Then we'll grab a staff path and you can pick whatever design you want. They're all the same price and we'll bring that in. Now we are currently still on a width of 8 meters. I don't really want that, so I'm going to take that off. And then this is where the path networks become nice and complex. So in order to get paths, you'll see it snapping onto the doors of all of these buildings. What we want to do is get a path network that comes off here and into all of these. So I'm going to make sure that angle snaps on certainly for this. I'll start off with the little staff room here and we'll just snap in like so. Now if I don't want that to go into that door, I just hold control and that way it's not snapping and we can just, I'll let go of control here so we can join it onto the main path there. Now again at this end, if we just hover over this with our mouse, you'll see it makes a nice right angle. So let's do that. Again, I'll press control here and we're just going to bring it out this side because it might be we want staff to access multiple sides of this building. So we'll leave it like that. Now from this path, we already connected into the staff room, but you'll see here, if I just drag it down a little bit, that is now connecting into the veterinary surgery that we have here. So it's not there, that's not connected. Here it is. So let's left click there and then we'll go ahead and connect in all of these buildings along this path edge. So the keeper's hut, so the workshop and also the research centre here as well. Now what we want to do is bring this path out to these other buildings down these sides. Now again, if you just hover over this with your mouse, you'll see it snapping into certain locations. So that seems to be nicely in the middle of all of these buildings. So we'll do that. I'm going to hold control on my keyboard so it doesn't snap into the keeper door there, and we're going to just continue that on out straight this side, like so. I'm going to do exactly the same thing the other side. If you don't get the snapping effect like this, it'll be dependent on where you've placed your buildings. Just make sure you just move it to the place you want, so you just hover along like this until you found a suitable place for your path to go. So we'll do exactly the same thing there, and then of course we want to make sure that we are snapping in and providing access to all of these doorways, just like that. So that gives our staff access to all of their rooms and out onto the main guest path to access the main zoo. And of course they're using staff path here so the guests cannot access this area. Now of course we are also going to want to hire staff to work in our buildings and across our zoo. So in order to do that, we go to our zoo menu in the bottom left corner of our screen here. And there's a whole load of menus here and we'll go through this as the series progresses, but just to point out, ticket pricing and opening hours to adjust those daylight hours as well are here, so you don't always have to click on those entrance gates in order to adjust that. Let's go to our staff menu for now, and to hire staff we've got all these buttons at the bottom here. So there are 7 different types of staff. We do not need all of these when we start the game. So what we want to start off with is we want a keeper, who is going to look after our first load of animals. And for some reason, I've started playing the game. So let's pause that immediately. We are also going to want a mechanic. We're also going to want a vet who will look after our animals. And the mechanic, I would add, will fix barriers, fix broken things around your zoo, so they're super useful. And then a caretaker, you don't necessarily need until you've got guest facilities like food and drink stalls in. However, I will be putting them in almost straight away, so I'm going to get a caretaker as well. And they do also help transport animals when we get them, as well as the vets, so they're quite useful to have. So really you just want to start with those 4. A security guard is not necessary right from the start. We don't need an educator either until we've got the education talk stands or tours, so we'll leave that for now as well. And vendors, they come when we have shops, so again we'll leave that. So we just want these 4 in to start off with. You can see here they've got various different salaries. Now the caretakers are super cheap, which is why I'm not kind of opposed to having one even if we don't have those food and drink stalls in yet. That's absolutely fine. We also have a happiness and an energy rating for the staff here, but we're going to touch on that again in a future episode, and also work zones as well. But to start a zoo, that will do absolutely fine. So let's talk about choosing an animal. Now in order to buy animals and trade animals, you want to go to the animal trading. There's also exhibit trading here, and again we'll touch on exhibits in the next episode. But for now we want animals, which are going to go into our habitats. They're the larger things. Exhibits are things like snakes and frogs and spiders, which operate in quite a different way to the main habitat animals. So I had a filter on there. I'm just going to reset all filters by clicking this button, and this gives us a complete list of animals available. Now if you're playing in challenge mode or in sandbox, you'll see you just have 2 male versions and 2 female versions of each animal available to you. If you're on franchise, you've got whatever is being traded by everyone across the globe at that time. So there will be some which are bought by these conservation credits that you can see in green here, and some which are bought by cash. Now when you first start a franchise zoo, you only have 200 conservation credits, and frankly cash is fairly limited. You'll see we've eaten into that 40,000 budget quite a bit already just by adding our staff areas, and we're yet to build a habitat all by the animals. So the first animal that you choose has got to be quite a wise choice. And ideally what you want is an animal that is high in appeal, which you can see from the ratings here. Now some of these have little bronze badges. That means they're of a better quality. They'll be more appealing and more attractive to your guests, and some have silver, which is even better, and you will find gold ones as well. I think generally speaking you have to kind of breed them yourself if you're in sandbox, but you will find them on franchise, although of course they'll tend to be more expensive than just the basic animals. So what you want to do is choose an animal that is high in appeal but relatively low in cost, and ideally really we want to buy something with a low amount of conservation credits or a really low amount of cash for our first animal, because we really need to watch how that goes. So some of the best animals that you can choose to start off with are certainly the Nile Monitor, which is actually what we're going to go for today. If you've got the DLCs, the Black-tailed Prairie Dog works really well as well. Generally speaking, smaller animals aren't going to cost loads in food. If you decide, so if we search by appeal, you see elephants have the highest appeal. They're also insanely expensive. Gorillas as well. We do not have the money or the conservation credits for this. But even if we did decide to spend the money on a lion, for example, the cost of their food is so high that we will go bankrupt in no time. So please don't be tempted to jump in with an absolutely massive animal to start off with, because you will not be able to afford it in the long run. So instead, what I'd recommend doing is actually searching by price. So you can see the Black-tailed Prairie Dog does come up here because I have got that DLC. I have all DLC active, I would add. With something like the common warthog, you'll see the appeal here is 766. It's actually relatively low, same with the Indian peafowl. So you want to try and find something which is really over 1,000, I would say. European fallow deer could be a good choice. A dingo, a bongo, anything like that would be a good starting animal. A llama's slightly less on appeal, so yeah, really aim for something that's over 1,000 that's not going to break the bank. And you can just scroll through like this to get inspiration if you want to. Pronghorn antelopes, all of those are relatively good starting animals. But yeah, what we are going to go for is the Nile Monitor. So this is a base game animal, so again, if you don't have the DLCs, you can follow along with this as well. But you can see here they've got a 1,600 appeal, 1,500 randomly for the silver one, which should be better, but that's okay. So they've got a pretty nice appeal for a starting animal and a very attractive price tag. Now when you're trading animals as well, they all have a time limit, so watch out for that. So if you refresh this and you've got 4 animals like this and all of them are rubbish, then you could just wait until the time limits are up and a new one will appear. On franchise mode, obviously it depends on who's putting what onto the marketplace, so sometimes you can't get hold of the animal that you necessarily want, which is another reason why I'm actually playing in sandbox mode, but making it as if we're playing franchise. Now choosing an animal as well, they all have certain requirements. So the key thing here is the Zoopedia. So if we click on this Nile Monitor, we'll go to Zoopedia, and you can also access this in the top left of your screen on this green button that you can see there, the Zoopedia. And here we have all of the details of all of the animals available in the game. So this is another way to search if you wanted something that is, you know, temperate and North America. We could search for that here. You can obviously flip between habitat and exhibit as well. But I know that we're going to do this one, so let's choose this. And then in here, there's various details about their environment. Now, the reason why I've chosen this is because they don't need a lot of space. They need a little bit of water, which is fine. They don't need any climbing or any deep water, so they're not deep water swimmers. They just need a little bit of water to swim in. They have a nice low boundary requirement, so they only need a 0.5 metre fence in order to keep them in. And this is crucial. Keep your eye on this when you are putting in habitats, because you have to make sure that you adhere to that. But the key thing is, in this species data tab here, this is what we need to take account of. So for the Nile Monitor, we can only have up to 3 animals in each habitat, so 1 male and 2 females. So again, when we have babies and they grow up, we need to make sure we're selling on the males, so we've only got 1 in there. Otherwise there will be infighting, there will probably be protesters. People just don't like that, and the animals won't be happy. We could also have a male bachelor group and just have 2 males without any females there, that would be fine, or a female bachelor group of up to 3. Now, there's lots of information here. We'll touch on some of this later on, but the key things are life expectancy, 15 years. Age of sexual sterility, death. So we want to make sure that we've got animals that can breed, because that is the way that we're going to increase our conservation credits and also attract people to the zoo. If there's babies, then you can raise your zoo ticket price entrance because guests like to come in and see the babies. Now, this is a slightly interesting choice because it is difficult to breed them in captivity, but if I go back up to the other animal that I mentioned, and again, you do need the North American Animal Pack for the black-tailed prairie dog, but you'll see here reproduction for captivity is average. They have quite a few offspring per mating event, very small interbirth period and gestation period, so they're a good one to start breeding with. So that's really what you want to look for when you're picking an animal as well. So let's go back to our Nile Monitor anyway. It does say difficult, but I haven't really had too many problems with it. But we do need to make sure that we've got an animal with relatively high fertility to make sure that that isn't too difficult for them. So we want someone that is over 4 years and quite a few years younger than 15 to make sure they've got time to reproduce, and we probably want 1 male and no more than 2 females. We could just have 1 female if we really wanted to. So let's go back to our trading here. Let's just refresh this, which is fine here. So let's click on them. So we want 1 male. We've either got this one, which we can buy with 40 conservation credits, or this one, which we can buy with cash. At the moment, I'd probably say it doesn't really matter. It's only 40. We could spend some there, but we might want to save it for some better animals. So right now, I think I will, and you can filter as well if you only want to see cash listings, for example. But this one has a very good fertility, terrible longevity, good size and good immunity. It is silver starred, so I think we are going to get this male. It's only 6, they're the same age in fact, so it's got quite a number of years left to make babies for us. So let's click adopt there. We don't need to say send to zoo yet because we haven't set up the habitat. And then let's have a look at the female. So we've got this one with 67% fertility, not great on the other ratings there, but we can breed to make it better. This one's slightly more average. It's not too much of a difference in age, so I actually think we'll get both of these. So let's adopt this one for 32 and then this one for cash as well. So you can see once you've adopted animals, they enter into your animal storage here. So we can see we've got the 2 females and the male Nile Monitors all sitting waiting to go. Now let's go back to Zoopedia before we create their habitat and just check the size that we need. So they can have 2 to 10 offspring per mating event, my goodness. So if we go back into natural habitat here, we've got 3 adults. So we're going to need 350 metres of land plus 113 of water. We're then adding in, I don't know, let's say both females get pregnant and we've got 20 babies, the maximum. We're going to need 600 of land and 300 of water. So we need a total space of at least 900 metres squared, which is not huge, I would add, for Planet Zoo. And the other good thing about these animals is they have a relatively wide temperature requirement. Obviously, if you're in a taiga biome or a tundra biome, this animal's probably not going to work. You're going to have to put in heaters or coolers, again, which I will talk through later in the series, but it's going to suit our 26-degree temperature pretty well, I would say. And finally, we'll just take note they need a grade 2 fence, which is more than 0.5 metre. So let's come out of there and we'll start building our habitat. Now, in order to make our habitat, we want to firstly come into this barriers menu here. Now you'll notice we have a variety of gates, which you can filter by here, and then also barriers this side. Now you can position either one you want to first. So you could put in the gate first if you wanted to align it really nicely to a path. Again, don't forget you press Z to spin that around, and you'll want to make sure that you've got that little plate that sits outside the gate. That's the entrance to it, so the habitat will sit the other side of the wall. So you could do that first. The way I like to do it is to put in our barriers. Now, just before we do that, this is only going to be a temporary habitat, as I've mentioned. The Nile Monitors will eventually be moved into a reptile house further in the zoo because I want this to be the main entrance, so I don't really want animals right in front of it. But obviously we need to make money, so we need to stick within our little power zone. So this is how I like to start in order to get us off on a good foot so that we can then start creating a really creative and realistic zoo after that. But let's talk about a few principles first, because it is never a good idea, really, to put habitats right up against your main walkthrough path. So all visitors to the zoo here are going to be walking along this path, which means it could get potentially quite busy. So we really want to put in an extra little bit of path that we can then sit the habitat on. So guests, when they're viewing the animals, won't be standing all over this path and blocking the walking route for those coming into the zoo. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm actually going to use the logs round path for this. I'm going to make sure we're on just 4 meters. We don't need it to be particularly big for this. And we're just going to bring out a small segment. I'm going to leave angle snapping on for the purposes of this, and we will just leave a nice little gap in between our main path and this one. And then to snap it back in, yeah, you can just kind of drag your mouse until you get a position you're happy with. And don't forget, you can obviously hold control if you want to get more precise movements that aren't snapping directly into the path immediately. But I'm quite happy with that actually as a curve, so we'll leave that there. And then we'll just snap this in. That's not particularly smooth, to be honest. So what I'm actually going to do is right click on that piece of path just to delete it. And I'm going to, we'll make that straight. Bring this round like that, so we get a similar curve to what we've got that side. And so from here we can now put in our barriers. Now we only need a grade resistance of 2, so the kind of bog standard barrier I'd say that you probably want to use for your starting animals is likely to be the wooden logs. It is, you'll notice they all have different price tags. This is the cheapest. Now I don't really ever build habitats, to be honest, with these barriers. I always use a null barrier, which is something we will come onto in future episodes across this series. But as a beginner, I think it's important to understand the concepts of a barrier in this sense. I like to use the null one, which means we can create essentially our own barrier for the animals. But for now, let's use this. So we're just going to left click on the ground here, and you can see there's various different controls. I wouldn't worry about this at first when you start to place in your barrier, and again we'll go through these different options that we have down here further into the series. But one key thing is you'll notice the barrier can't go really close to the edge of the path. You have to leave a very, very slight gap. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to get as close as we can without it actually interfering with the path and turning red, meaning that we can't place it. So we can't place it there, we wouldn't be able to left click. We can place it anywhere else. And I am leaving angle snap on for this so we get a really nice straight line along the edge of this path here, because this is where the visitors are going to stand to view the animals here. Now, exactly like paths, we've got a length on this, so this is currently 8 meters. Now if I do it 8 meters and I want to create a square, we're going to get very, very close to the staff complex here. So what I'm actually going to do is just drop this back to 4 meters, which seems fine for me, and then I will extend it back up to 8. Again, I think the easiest thing is if you're wanting to build around it when you start, the easiest thing is probably to keep to increments of 4 meters with those building habitats in mind. But of course you can go for any variety of shapes you wanted to. So you could go for a completely bizarre shape like this. Whatever meets your needs. And let's just undo that because that's not exactly how I'm going to do this. And you can also do curved sections as well. So let's just talk about that. So now I've actually undone that. I've snapped off the barrier. So in order to snap back into it, I want to go to the end. You'll see that's highlighted. If we just left click on that, we can then add to it. So I could go back to the straight section, could take angle snap off if I want to, but let's actually just try a little curved corner at the back here, and you'll see it kind of bends out like that. Now if I hold it here and then I hold Z, I then get greater control, so I could have it sort of actually concave, curving inwards if I wanted to. Otherwise, you'll just use the default curve if you don't hold Z, so that's something to note. But I'm actually not going to put a curved section here for now. We're just going to create a very, very simple habitat. Let's undo that again. We'll just click here to add that. Now, if I wanted to suddenly flip to the other side, I'm just going to right click my mouse anywhere away from the barrier, and I could jump to here and start to add to the habitat this side. So let's then just finish this off. So I'm just going straight across here. Now this obviously isn't lined up perfectly, so we could just snap it in like that, or we could try and figure out the measurements, but the easiest thing is to snap it in, and then we can edit the barrier afterwards. So now that we've got a complete circle barrier shape, the barrier is complete, we can then click here and there's various different options. So if we wanted to add to it, we could start adding to it and press the plus button, and then we can start adding another barrier this side if we wanted multiple animals next to each other. I'll just right click to undo that. Or we can click this arrowed button here, which is to move it. So let's click that, and you need to click and hold, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to eye this into place. So it's not precise, it doesn't snap when you move it like this, but it does mean you could move it wherever you wanted to. But let's just try and snap that in like so. Now the other thing is we want it to be 0.5 meter in height, because what I want is for the guest to be able to look over and into the habitat. If you had an animal that needs a larger wall than that, then in order to change the height, you can click on any one segment and you could just draw it up and down like this using this button here. Again, just left click and hold and drag, and you'll get whatever height you want to. Now, importantly, actually, if you do height snap, that will help here, and that will do it in certain increments, which can make it easier to do. But then the other option we want to think about is snap to adjacent heights. So here, because I've changed this, I want to make sure it's the same height as these. So let's tick that. I'm going to go back to here, and I'm just going to drag that down, and that will snap into the same height as the barriers around it. So I can increase the size of this pole, and it will just increase the height of one part of the segment. If I wanted to do these segments together, I could click on this one, and then you'll see this little arrow key here. We can just drag that across like so, and then we could raise up this whole segment. Now again, if I turn off height snap and snapping to adjacent heights, we can have a little bit more freedom with it, but let's undo that. In order to adjust the entire barrier, you can press this circle here, and then again, just hover over any one of the poles in between the barriers and just drag it down. Now you can see this height all the way around is just 1 meter, which is actually quite tall. We can't go any lower than that, so that's why I actually like to use these null barriers, because then I can get the 0.5 meter height that is required for the Nile monitors, and it makes it easier for children to see over the barriers. Unless we wanted to, of course, raise this path up, which again is something that we're going to touch on in future episodes. But actually what I want is a little bit of privacy for the Nile monitors, so I'm actually going to select the entire habitat. I'm going to make it slightly taller, actually, and we're going to go up to a height of, let's say, 2.31 meters, that'll be fine. And then I just want to change the height of these front 3 here so that people can see into the habitat. So we've dragged over these 3 sections, and then what we want to do is of course grab the height button, and we're going to drag this right down as far as we can go, which is just the 1 meter segment. Now you'll see these are sloped. If we didn't want that, we could just grab this segment and raise it back up. And again, like if we put on snap to adjacent heights, that is also going to help here. So we'll just do that here. And you'll see it gets to a point where it just nicely snaps in there, so we can get it exactly equal to the rest of the habitat. So that's actually what I'm going to do this time. We could make it diagonal, but again, just showing you the basic mechanics of it, that's what we'll do. And now, of course, we want to add the habitat gate. So you have got these low little gates, so if it was low all the way around, you could add these in quite nicely. Obviously, it's going to look slightly weird, honestly, if you put it into a taller habitat wall. So we're just going to use this wooden gate here, and I'm actually going to line it up nicely to this staff area. So like that. So again, just to put this on, you'll just hover over where in the barrier where you want it to go, and then just left mouse click in order to place it like that. What it means is the keeper, who is going to be looking after the animals, has the keeper hut there, so it's nice and close access to where he's looking after the animals. And we've also got the staff room as well, which will be required by this keeper in order to rest. We're going to go more into staff requirements and work zones and things like that again in a future episode. But there we have an outline of a habitat. Now going back to Zoopedia, of course, what we did want for 3 adults and potentially up to 20 babies was the 900 meters squared. So if we just click anywhere on the habitat wall, it brings up the habitat information here. So I'm actually going to rename this to Nile Monitors, just so that it is easier to manage when we come into our zoo management tab and see which habitat it actually is. Again, that will be covered in a future episode. This is just about how to get started here. And we can see basic information about it. So if we go to terrain here, we have a land area of 580 meters squared. which if we come back to here, you can see was not really enough, I don't think, for 3 adults. We've got 3, 4, it's going to be tight, especially if we add in a whole load of babies. We're going to be really, really tight indeed here. So let's actually just make this a little bit bigger. And then we can recheck out the land of our habitat. So 880, that's not too bad. So we could definitely support 3 adults and up to 20 babies, worst case scenario, realistically, in this habitat. Now, of course, going back to Zoopedia, the Nile Monitors do need a water requirement as well. So in order to get that in, we need to do a tiny bit of terraforming. So we come to the terrain tab for this, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail. But what we want to put in some water is the push tool here. I'm going to make it a relatively small size, and then what we're going to do is kind of almost create a little semi-river flowing through here. So we're just going to push it down gently, and you can change the size and the intensity, so if you feel like you're going down too far too fast, then you can of course change that. I'm going to bring in a small kind of pool here. Now it's probably a bit too deep, so let's use the pool tool and we'll just raise it up. And the terrain tools again can be relatively tricky to use, but we'll go into them in a lot more depth as the series goes on. I want it to be about that level, I think, so I'm actually going to get the flatten to foundation tool and just drag that out. And then we'll get smooth, which will help to round off the edges. And of course we need to make sure that the animals can actually climb into the water. If you've got a super steep edge to your water area, they will not be able to climb in, so you definitely want to avoid that. Now I think actually what I'll do here is pull this right up to the barrier, so there's a bit more deep water up at the barrier's edge, and there are ways to make this a lot neater again, which we will go into in future episodes. So we'll smooth off that, and then to put the water in, we want to come down to the water tab here. You've got calm water, rough water, select water and remove water, but we're going to go for calm here. And you can see when you hover over with your left mouse, you get various different levels. I'm going to go for pretty much the fullest here, although that seems like an awful lot, so let's undo. If we go down here, do we think that bank is far too steep for the Nile Monitors to climb into, so we are going to have to go a little bit higher like that. Let's get rid of that, and then let's go back to our habitat and just check here. So we've got far too much water now and potentially not enough land. So let's undo the water again, and of course if you didn't want to do that, we'll add it back in. You can go into terrain, click to remove water and click on it, or you can just simply right click on the water as well when you're in the water menu. So let's come back to sculpting and we'll flatten to foundation. I'm going to make this little river bit slightly smaller, and in here as well. We'll just bring in the edges a little bit and go back to smooth and make sure we are still smoothing out around the edge here. We'll come back into water and let's get in our water. So that is slightly less and it looks pretty rubbish right now, but I'll show you how to make it look a little bit better. We've still got 312. I mean, that's way more than we actually needed, I believe, if we come into here. Let's change this. We've got 20 and 3. We needed 303. Okay, we're quite close. But that would be the absolute maximum that we'd need, so I'm not too worried about that. And just to be clear, you do want more than what the requirements here, because we're going to be putting in some foliage and some rocks and things like that, so the navigatable land area for the Nile Monitors will absolutely be less than that once we have detailed this up and made it look a lot prettier. So that is definitely something to bear in mind. So before we put any rocks or foliage in, I am going to move the animals in now. So we're going to go to animal trading for this and into animal storage, and this is where we have the animals that we have purchased. So let's select the Nile Monitors and we'll say send to zoo, and then you can just click on your habitat here. Now sometimes it will say that you can't do that, and that's probably because you need to press play to make sure your staff are on the ground and activated. If you've just hired them and you've still left it on pause and they're floating mid-air, then it won't register that you've got any staff to transport them. Now the way the animal trading works is they'll come into your trade centre. If they are sick, they'll need to go to quarantine before they go into the habitat. And again, if they become ill, then they'll go into quarantine here, or they'll need access to the vet's surgery over this side as well. So this is why it's quite nice to have staff areas and staff facilities right next to your habitats. You only need one trade centre on a map, I would add. You don't need any more. So kind of consider that. I'd usually just plonk it once in the main area by the entrance and leave it at that. Now before I click play, I do just want to make sure that we've got some basic things set up in order to be making money when guests do arrive, because as soon as we hit play, they're going to start arriving. and the Nile Monitors aren't going to be overly happy, so we want to make sure that we're keeping the guests as happy as possible in this case. So there are a couple of key things when it comes to making money. So let's go into facilities, and in guest facilities, in the finance tab, there are donation boxes, and this is one of the best ways that you can make money in your zoo. So do not forget to place these, and what you want to do is place these at places where the guests are going to be congregating to look at those animals. So for example here. And with these as well, if you click on them, you'll notice there's a little colour editor here. You could change those colours, so we could make it a little bit of FewC pink if we wanted to. Let's in fact do that. A little bit of FewC pink and blue. And again, we'll come into Colour Monitor, we'll click on that, and you'll see recent colours are there, so let's click Apply, and then we can change all of these. Of course, a much quicker way to do that is to place one, and then if you click on it, you can duplicate it either with Control-D or by clicking this button here, and then you've got one of the exact same colours as well. But you really don't need to put these on main paths because people won't donate unless they've just kind of seen an animal. So you just want to put it where the guests are congregating to look at the animals. Now, alongside that, guests will donate more money when they are educated, and education is something we will go into in a lot more detail. But for now, let's just go to the facilities tab again. We're on media, devices and education, and then if you come down to the education menu at the bottom, there's various different things we can put in here. But there are only two things that we really want to start off with. One is a habitat education board, and there are two of these, so you can get a set with it. There's just the stand, there's the screen, and then a set. For this, I think we'll get the set. So to place this in, if we hold Z and drag with our mouse, we can rotate that. Again, same options here with angle snap if you wanted to take that off. And we're just going to place one of these in at either end of this habitat here. In fact, actually this one we can put on the wall. So let's do that. Let's get just the screen. You'll notice it's not sitting nicely on the wall there. So if we do align to surface here in the menus, click that, all of a sudden it's snapping in really nicely onto the edge of this barrier here. Now, if we come back out, click on these screens, we can choose an animal for it. Now, because the Nile Monitors actually haven't been delivered yet, it's not coming up, so we'll need to click play before we do that, but that's set up nicely in order to educate our guests in terms of what the animal's conservation status is and what their requirements are, where they live, a little bit more about them. Alongside that, back in the education menu, there is also an educational speaker, and this is a really good idea to have one of these, I think, to start off with, because like I said, the better educated they are, the more they are going to donate. So really consider that. It's worth, these aren't huge amounts of money at all, so it's really worth not forgetting to put these in right from the beginning. And again, I'm just going to put it in the barrier for now. We can hide it away, and there's various different techniques to do that, which I will show you again in future episodes. But for now, this is just a basic habitat, and like I said many times, this is temporary. This is not going to be a part of our final zoo. This is literally just to get us started. So let's click play and see what happens. Now, as we're clicking play and people will come in, the Nile Monitors will be delivered. You'll see the janitor there and the vet. They can both transport animals from the trade centre into the habitat. And there they go. So let's zoom in and take a look. There we go. So we should have two of... Oh, they are. They're sitting on top of each other. I was thinking there was two delivered then. And already our keepers come in to check on them. So now immediately I have hit spacebar and hit pause on the game because there are other requirements we need to take into account with these animals. So if you click on one of them, again, you can change the names of any of these animals. So anyone who comments, give me some suggestions for names for our Nile Monitors. Let me know in the comments and we'll give them names on future episodes. But for now, we've got Taiba, I think is how I'd say that at least. And you can see her welfare here. Now, if their welfare goes too low, you will get protesters in your zoo, and we really don't want that because it's a very negative effect on your zoo's reputation and what people think of your zoo, how much they're willing to spend, pay, and time that they'll spend in your zoo. So we really want to keep an eye on that. And there are lots of different things to consider here. What you kind of want to do is go through all of these tabs at the top. So if we go to terrain first, we can see here the space that's available. So actually the land space isn't that great, even for two of them, it looks like. So we've got 581 metres and they only need 325, so it's not too bad. We've got way more water actually than they need. But there is also terrain types to consider here. Now for each of these, so we've got the various different terrain types here, and they've got a kind of band of what they are happy with. So at the moment, anything that's red, we're outside of the band of happiness. So they haven't got enough rock, and they've got far too much long grass. They probably want a little bit more short grass, a little bit more soil certainly as well. and some sand actually, so we could do all of those things. So if we come into the terrain tab and we go to the painting tab, this is where we get our various different terrain types. We have got grass, short, long, different types of soil, different types of rock and different types of sand, and also snow there as well, clearly not needed for a Nile monitor. And this is where we want to start shaping up our terrain. Now ordinarily I don't really do this until I've put in all the foliage and things like that, but I think this is probably the easiest way to start, and then you can make adaptations to it afterwards. But let's start by getting rid of some of this long grass. So when you zoom in, you can see the long grass versus the short, and it is quite different. Now they're happy with some long grass, so we'll keep some of it. Maybe around this kind of back area. In fact, actually, maybe around this front corner. Let's keep a bit of long grass around this front corner, and then we'll get rid of the rest of it just with short grass for the moment. And we're already edging up to having almost too much short grass. Now they want a bit more rock, so let's get some rough rock in here, and we'll make a little bit of a rocky kind of bank to the edge of our water. With this you can change the size of it, you can change the intensity of it, so I can make it kind of just very light patches of rock, and that is a good way of blending different types in to make it feel a bit more realistic. So we turn that down now and we add in a tiny bit of sand, you can see around the rock here. That starts to feel a little bit more like actual terrain as opposed to a very stark contrast between soil and grass. Now what I'm planning and what I'm thinking is I'm going to do a little rock sculpture with a little cave in this corner here. So we will just sand over all of that bit. Again, we need to keep in mind we need a bit more soil here. Let's get rid of some of this grass. Maybe we'll patch in a little bit of sand with some soil. Maybe we put the soil actually next to the rock, kind of looks better. And transition out to a little bit more sand the other side. And they do want some more rock. Let's maybe change some of this to smooth. You can have that coming out that way. And certainly at this front bit here as well, let's change all of that to rock. And we still don't have enough. I will continue that on around here until we do have enough rock. And of course we need more soil, so let's make this super duper small actually, and we'll go for a light soil edge around this rock here. We'll go for a little bit of soil around the keeper's entrance here too, and maybe little patches across this grass is needed. Okay, so there we go, just adding little patches of soil in around the place, and we can add plants around this to make this make a little bit more sense. But that is now all green across this, so that should be super good for the Nile monitors there. And then if we come onto the environment tab, so this is in terms of the plants that we can put into the habitat. Now they don't like very many. And this is a big reason why people do turn to Sandbox to turn off things like the habitat requirements for animals so they can put in more plants than is actually needed, because this really isn't very much. We put in one big tree and we'll be almost there. But the key thing is we need to make sure that we are adhering to their requirements here. It says ideal plant range, so they're not going to freak out if you put something that's not in this. However, they won't be overly happy. So the quick way to know exactly what we're putting in is correct is if we go to the nature tab here, and then if you click actually on these buttons, so while we're still clicked on the animal, you can see it's adding a filter to our nature tab. Again, we'll do that for tropical and for grassland. And then everything that is showing here is now suitable to be going in this habitat. Now rocks you don't actually need to worry about. You can put any type of rock in here and they would be absolutely fine with it. It's really just the plants. So let's go into the plants menu and we can see what they'd like to have. Now the way I tend to do it is actually usually to start off with the rocks for this, because I find that a little bit easier. And one consideration we do need to make is that this keeper needs to be able to access all of this habitat in order to clean up poo and things like that. So we do need to create a little bridge over this river here. So I'm going to do that using a few rocks. So we're going to use this rock cladding 2x4, which is quite big, but that's absolutely fine. And what we're going to do is I'm going to place it here. Again, same as everything else, I'm just holding Z and moving my mouse around in order to get that to the place that I want. And I think what we'll do is create a bridge over this side. Now we're going to go into detailing it a lot more, but again, it's the same options down here. So if you align to surface, if I press shift, which is what we use to move things up and down, and then drag with my mouse like this, and then we could left click to place it. I have a rock placing like that. If I want to undo that, I'll just click on it and delete it as well, just to show you that. Or of course, press the undo button. Let's go back to this. But if I've got align to surface on, if I press shift down into the ground, so if I just wanted it quite low in the ground like this, it'll pop back out. So So ideally make sure align to surface is turned off. You can leave angle snap on if you want to, but let's leave it like that for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over where I want it. Again, I'm going to hold shift. Now that I've got it to the angle I want by using Z, I'm going to hold shift and lower it down into the ground like this. And then I'm going to do exactly the same here. I'm just going to move it over. I'm going to hold shift. And what we're going to do is create essentially like a gradual step up. Now I kind of want the Nile monitors to be able to use this as well. And I'll show you how we can check that again in a second. And there are more advanced movements that you can make using X, but we're going to go into those again in a future episode rather than now. So I think now I'm going to go slightly further down. We're going to start coming down this other side like this. And the keeper will be able to walk over these rocks. I'm hoping, like I said, the Nile monitor will be able to as well. But this should create a nice little access way for our keeper at least. And then coming right back down to sink into ground level. So you can see it's a little bit of a bridge over there, which just adds a nice effect. But there we go, we've got our bridge in. And let's just see if the Nile monitors can use that. So if we click on a Nile monitor and we go to our heat maps again, and we wanted to click on habitat this time, and I need it to play a little bit because I've only just put those rocks in. So let's get play, it'll go away and then it will recalibrate. And yes, they can walk the whole way across that. Now they can't swim under it, which is fine, I'm not too worried about that, but they can walk across, so I like that. I like that. So going back to nature, again, what you can do now is just start putting in some different trees. And again, use Z, so if you click it once, it'll just rotate at 90-degree increments like that, or you can hold Z, drag your mouse, and it will rotate it to either your angle snap or you take that off of completely free rotate. You can press shift now that we're not aligning to surface. Actually, I'm going to take off align to water as well for this purpose. Press shift and just drag it right into the ground if you wanted to. So we could essentially turn this massive tree into a big bush, which is a really useful trick in Planet Zoo. Now, I quite often think it's a good idea to get your larger plants in first. So let's just say we go for an Aleppo pine. And actually, if you click shift as well, so if you've dragged it down and it's in the ground like that, you just hit shift and let go, it'll pop back up to surface level. So that's quite a useful trick as well. Let's put one of these in this corner. And again, I'm keeping an eye on that. So see, this one tree has produced 3% of coverage. So that's a reasonable amount already. These ones are lovely little trees. So I'm going to use just one of these, I think, by the entrance to the bridge here. And again, I don't want it to look exactly the same. So I'm going to hit Z and it will just rotate it nicely. And then we're actually going to kind of cover up a little bit of the keeper's entrance, I think, here. But we won't use that. Let's use a blackthorn bush for this. And what that means is when the guests are stood here, they actually can't see that keeper's gate, which I think is a nice little touch. Now, we're already at 6% here. Now, the mangrove apples, again, are really, really nice trees, and I love the roots on these. So let's stick this out on this little kind of sticky out bit here. So we'll go like that, and again we could sink it a little bit more into the ground. So if we do that and then we hit either M on our keyboard or the arrow buttons here, we can then move it if we don't like the placement, and we can delete it from that menu as well. Make it a little bit lower, just like that. But one thing you do when you're putting these in is keep an eye on the terrain here. So we're starting to drop down a little bit as we add in more plants, so you do need to be a little bit aware of that as you're going through this. Now I think we will use a palm tree here, but let's use shift just to drag this down so it's not quite as tall. And it offers a little bit more shade for the habitat as well. So once you've got all of your big plants in, what I would suggest then is coming through and just doing a little bit of extra detailing with some smaller plants and adding those in. Now the Drin grass is one of the most valuable assets, I'd say, in this game. It really adds a touch of kind of naturalness. There's not a huge amount of grass assets really in Planet Zoo, but I absolutely love this one and how it looks, so you'll probably end up using it a fair amount. Now I will come around and do some more detailing on this, but that is the general principles of how to get your plants and things like that in. The next thing to move on to is enrichment. Now, so if we go to the habitat menu here, this is where we can find food and water feeders, beds and shelters if the animal requires it, heaters and coolers if we're in the wrong kind of temperature for the animal, and also enrichment items. And what you'll notice is there are a few things in here already, but what we want to do is come to filter, choose our species, find the Nile monitor, and then see what we've got. Now, I have got blueprints, so let's turn blueprints off. So at the moment, we do not have any enrichment items for it. So you have food enrichment items and toy enrichment items, and climbing if it is an animal that needs climbing enrichment. But that's it. Now, we don't have any because we need to do some research. So research is super important right from the beginning of the game. Now, you have two types of research. One is the vet research, which happens in the vet research centre here. And the other is mechanic research, which happens in the workshop. So you need to make sure that you've got those placed in order to do research, which is why I always include them right from the beginning. So now in vet research, what we need is a vet to research the Nile Monitor. If you click on that, then you can see what they're going to research. So a toy enrichment, a better food as well, which will keep them happier, and a fun fact if you want to have that. And you see we get another toy enrichment, a food enrichment, more toys, another food as we go through all of the different levels of the research here. So this is what we want to get started ASAP. So in order to do that, we're going to grab our vets and we're going to drag them onto this research panel here. If you have more than one vet, only one vet at a time can fit in a research centre. So if you want multiple vets researching, and these are all the diseases again, which is something we'll talk about in the next episode, you're going to need 2 research centres. And the other type of research is mechanic research, and this is where you see all of your different DLC themes, if you have the DLCs, which I do here. And this is where you can research these to unlock the different construction pieces that come with these themes. So lots more building, wall materials and props and the such like. But there are also further barriers if you do want to use the barrier assets. There's more barriers down here. Bigger staff workrooms, more power sources, that sort of thing. So it is definitely something to consider, but it's something we'll talk about in a future episode. But let's go back to the habitat menu, and of course we do want to put in some feeders and some waters. So at the moment we have got an open water source here which they can drink from. However, if you don't have that, you should put in one of the water sources. Now honestly, it's more expensive, but it is 100% worth the investment, is putting in the water pipe, because this will keep itself filled. You won't have to have the keeper come in and fill it. Because I do find quite often, I don't know if it's a bit buggy in the game, if you put a water trough down, it takes a while for the keeper to get to it to refill it. So you quite often end up with dehydrated animals, which is not ideal. So I'd really recommend going for the water pipe as a beginner right from the start. But we have got a water source in here that they can drink from. However, this is going to become dirty because we do need something from the facilities menu. So we're going to utilities, we're going to need a water treatment plant. And exactly like power, this has an area of effect. And it will also have a negative impact on guests as well, exactly like other staff buildings. So we really want to place it slightly further away. So what I'm going to do is actually add it into this group of staff buildings. So you'll see if I can place it anywhere I want to. And again, you said to turn it, but to add it into this group, if I hover over any one of these buildings, it says select group. So just left click there. And now it's snapping into the grid of this group, which is super, super useful. So we can do some nice building decorating around it. So I think actually what I will do is for now just place it in here. We may change it when we come to detail up this building, but we'll just turn it around like that and it's automatically snapping into the piece of path that we've got there, which is good news. And you can see that's easily covering our water source there. It's probably not very efficient because we're not actually going to have habitats here long term, so we'll probably want to move it out somewhere. But for now, that's going to do as a temporary placement. And this will keep this water clean so that the animals can drink from it. So the Nile Monitors actually do not need a water source, but they do need a food tray. So we've got a large one and a small one, which is suitable for them. And these change depending on the animal, so really make sure that you've got that filter on to make sure you're getting the correct thing. And I think it's quite interesting for guests to be able to see this. So we're going to put this quite close up to where the guests are going to stand. So let's put it on this rocky area, right about here. And of course, important that the keeper can access this as well, but we know they can walk across that bridge, so that'll be absolutely fine there. So let's just click back on our Nile Monitor. So you can see now, in terms of nutrition, last meal quality slightly down. Obviously, we need to do research to get that better, and we need research to do enrichment. But everything else is absolutely fine. Cleanliness is only at 99%. Someone must have done a poo somewhere. But everything else is in the green. They don't require hard shelter, but some animals do, which again is something that we'll talk about in future episodes. But yeah, that's everything that should be fine for the Nile Monitors in order for us to press play. So we've already got guests coming in from when I pressed play before, and we do want to remember, of course, to turn on our education screen. So if we just click on that, because it's right next to the Nile Monitors, that'll be top of the list. So let's choose that. We'll do that on both screens and also on the educational speaker as well. So on the educational speaker as well, it does have a range. So let's just adjust this to make sure it's covering a lot more of this walking path here. so it's a little bit wider, and that'll mean that guests are getting better education if they're standing over here, so that's what we really want to do there. Just before I press play as well, we are going to talk very briefly about guest needs, which will be something that we'll focus on more in the next episode, but we do want a couple of basic facilities. So if we go to the guest facilities tab here, we're going to want to give them drinks and food. Now, for now, and because of money's sake, I'm literally going to drop down a vending machine, which is like the worst possible thing to do. So we'll get a drinks vending machine and a food vending machine. We've still got loads of money in the bank, so you could easily build this in. But in the interest of time in this episode, that's what I'm going to go into in the next episode, is building a nice big food and drinks court. But they will want those, so we'll drop those in, and they will also want toilets as well. So let's go over here and just add in a toilet. Now this works exactly like how we place the staff buildings. We're in our own grid here. We're starting a new block of build. So let's just drop this in like that. I'm actually going to put 2 blocks in because I've got an idea of how I want to build around this block as well. And then the final thing I do want to put in is actually an information. There's a temporary placement. I'm going to drop it at the side of the path here. Now this is going to move, and I'm going to use the information stands as kind of entranceway ticket booths when we create our entranceway on the next episode. But that for now will do fine. Now with all shops, press play now, we have got a vendor already in that shop. So when you buy a shop, it will be hired with a vendor. So you don't need to do anything with that. However, because we have got food and drink here now too, we need to make sure we're putting in bins. So let's go into the bins, benches and security menu. There is a bins here. Now, again, this is something we can research. So with the mechanic, if you research the various themes, you'll unlock different types of bins with the different types of themes. But this is all we've got for now. So let's go ahead and put in a few of these just to make sure we're not getting horrible litter everywhere, because that will make your guests really unhappy. And they will want refunds. And you know, I've come over here and I see I haven't connected up the path for the toilet, so let's do that before we forget. I'm doing it like this because I know this is going to be staying here as an entrance block toilet, and I know exactly how I want to detail it up. So that will do. Now let's let it play for a little bit. We're at 13,000 now. We put in the toilets and the information booth, so it is in the red. But if we let it play, we should slowly start to be making money. Okay, now I did get the notification that vet research is complete. So if we just click on that, we can see, yep, it's the Nile Monitor vet research. So we should have unlocked a new toy enrichment. So let's go to habitat. We'll go to our enrichment items. And yes, we do have a sprinkler. So let's place this into the habitat somewhere. I was thinking somewhere's pride a place that the guests can see, so I'm going to place it in here. We'll just drop that onto the surface like that. And that's going to give them some fun and amusement. And hopefully, yeah, you'll see that enrichment is now not red anymore, it is orange, so that's getting better. And their welfare's at 80%, it's in the green, so that is really good. And we are making money, so we're on 14,800, so it is all going up. Let's take a little look at our finances in the zoom menu here. And yeah, you can see income. Now again, this is the importance of the donation bins. Most of the income is not coming from ticket sales or shop income, it's coming from donations. So do not forget to place those. And the reason why we're getting so much as well is because we are educating them on the Nile Monitors. So the two of those go really hand in hand. You can see someone throwing money in then. That was quite good timing. Now the final thing I want to touch on for today is just basics of building. So here we've got our toilet block. And if I click on it, we can go to select group, like I've mentioned, so we've got the whole group in there. Now if I come to the construction tab, this is where we can start to do some building. So we want architecture for this, and we want walls. Now to begin with as well, we haven't got a huge amount of stuff here, so I'll go to wall pieces. We've got some wooden walls like this, we've got some plaster walls, metal clad walls, breeze blocks and some concrete. Like, it's all very basic. So what you want to do is get your mechanic researching ASAP and get some of those themed unlocks so you get some better detailing opportunities. But here what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the metal clad. So I've just selected this, and again, exactly like how we added the water treatment plant to the staff area, we can just hover over the toilets and it says select to add group. Now we do want to do that because we want to snap into the grid of this. So you'll see this is now all in line with the edge of the toilet blocks. So I'm going to click Z to rotate it, and then it will snap it in to the side of the toilet. Now, for each part of the grid, you'll see you can kind of go inside or outside the grid with walls. Now, I really usually want to go inside, so we're going to hug the edges of these toilets as we go around. So not like that, we want it like that. And we're just clicking Z as we go all the way around here to fill this all in, like that, and Z again to spin that round. Now, I want to make a front to it, so I'm going to add to this building. I'm not just going to box in the toilets as we've got to decorate those up. I am going to add to this building, so we're going to go like that. And what it's going to be is essentially like you walk in here and then in on round into the toilet blocks. So on top of this, I do want to add a flat roof. So we're going to go for roofs and floors, and we'll go for flat roof here and see what options we've got. So we've got this concrete wall floor. Now again, we'll want to add it to our group so it will snap nicely into the grid. And you'll see it snaps to the top there. Now if I just hold shift, we can move it up and down. And that is where I want it, is sitting on top of these metal clap walls to create a kind of nice roof area. What I'd actually like for this is I don't want it perfectly in line. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to change the grid size. So we're going to put that all the way down to 1 metre. Now you'll see it's snapping, it's not, instead of jumping the 4 metres that it was before, it's now jumping 1 metre at a time. So what it means is I can do 1 metre out that way, 1 metre out this way, and then place it in there so that I've got a little bit of an overhang to my walls, and that's a good way of making a building feel a lot prettier, a lot better I think than otherwise. So we'll do this all the way around, and you can overlap these pieces, I would add, so you can see there's no collision or anything here, we can just overlap this. So we'll go ahead and fill this in again. We're going to come 1 metre out the back as well. We'll just go all the way around like that. Now it does get a little bit glitchy, but it's not too bad. That kind of gives us the basic of our toilet. Now I'm going to actually add a second floor to this. So we're going to go into walls again, and I'm going to go to metal clad, so I could filter here and say metal. So I've just got those types of walls that we're after. I'm going to go for the 2 metres. So before we did use the 4x4, which is the basic one to put around any facility like that, but we're going to go for the 2 metre here. So let's select add it to the group again. And we'll just spin it round. Now, I'm going to change the grid size again to 1 metre, and what I want is I want this to be slightly further back in than the main wall. So if it's on 1 metre, I know that that is 1 metre in, so that's level with where our other wall is. So we're going to go back to here. I'm just going to place that down because I think that is, 1 metre further in that side than the wall as well. So this is how I want my building to look. I'm going to hold shift to snap up to the roof height again. And we're just going to keep adding this in all the way around. Again, we're going to need to overlap here because it's a full width, but we're going to need some overlap in it. So just like that, and then I'm going to do exactly what we did before with the flat roof, so it was a concrete one. So we'll go ahead and find that same flat concrete wall floor, click shift until we get it to the height that we want. Make sure we've got that overhang again, so we're mirroring what we did on the ground floor. And then we'll come around and place this all around. Now there's no overlap on this actually, so it won't be too glitchy, which is nice. So we're not going to see much glitchiness from the outside. There we go, that gives us the basics of a slightly more interesting toilet block. Now we are going to go into building in an awful lot more detail in future episodes, so don't worry too much about this for now. Now there are ways obviously to detail this up as well. So if we come into signs and I go to toilet, there are various different toilet signs here that we could add to the building. So we select to add group. We'd probably want to align this to the surface again like that, so that shows up. So you could put in a couple of those. There's a bigger one, I think. There we go. I'm actually going to use this one here, which I think is quite nice. So we're going to put this on the front like that, which gives the entrance to our toilets. And then you can start having a little look at props if you wanted to really decorate this up. So there are vents, which could be quite nice to go into a toilet. Again, we're on a line to surface here, which is why it's snapping onto the walls or snapping even onto the ceiling if we wanted to. I'm going to put in a couple of vents at the back here, just like this. And there is also a clipboard. Yeah, we're going to put a little clipboard here. So it's like the staff will come in and check the cleanliness of the toilets, for example. Something like that. Now I'm going to do a little bit more detailing around this and the habitat. But that's essentially the basics of building, and guests will be happier with the more decoration and building you have around. So this isn't going to make them as happy as this nice toilet block now. But Yeah, that'll have to do. We're making decent amount of money, I'd add, so this really is a strong start. And with this amount of money, we can then think about adding in a better animal even as our second animal. So just to finish up today's episode, I'm going to go in and do a little bit of detailing around this habitat. We'll add in a ton more rocks, a little cave, I think. The point of interests are nice for the animals, so a little cave, I think, for the Nile Monitors. Rocks around the edge of the barriers as well to cover them up, because some of these just basic vanilla barriers are relatively ugly and plain. So you'll see what this looks like in a second. And then we'll just add some foliage along the main entrance pathway just to give it a nice tree-lined effect as people walk into the zoo. And all of the techniques that I use to do this and rationale will be covered in the following episode, so you don't need to worry about that for now. Okay, so here is the finished result. Now obviously I've left the information booth because we'll be moving that to our zoo entrance, which will come in the next episode, and we'll be sorting out the staff area as well, talking a little bit more about work zones and staff management, research and the such like. But here we have our little toilet complex. I actually added a couple of windows up the top and a few extra vents and a little potted plant in there as well. Little flower bed out the front. Again, we'll talk about how you can do that in future episodes. And down here I've actually buried trees, so holding shift and pushing them down into the ground. Some of these are big trees actually that you can see in the background that are really buried right into the ground, just so we get the tops of them, which I think adds when we come down to ground level. Let's get rid of that. We come down to guest height level, you can see it kind of adds a nice barrier to this entranceway as we come in, so I really like how that looks with the London plane trees lining the path. And then coming onto the habitat, yeah, we've added in the cave as mentioned and rocks all the way around, little touches of foliage here and there, but again we'll talk about kind of how to think about how to do this in future episodes, so that will all be touched on then. And one point to note, we've got loads more enrichment items in here because the vet research did finish as I was doing this because I'm super slow. And you can see now after all of this we're up to £30,000, so I have doubled the money from when we really press play and let guests enter the zoo, so we are really off to a good start. So we've got a lot more money to do what we want with, and some proper detailing and proper habitats come the next episode. So please do let me know suggestions for animals that you'd like to see in this zoo, names for animals or even staff as well if you would like to. Obviously the name of the zoo is still up for debate. If you like Few Zoo, let me know. If you think it should be called something else, let me know that as well. But if you have enjoyed the episode, please do remember to hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified when the next episode is out. Likes, comments and shares really help me out, so if you have enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, I will catch you in episode 2. Bye bye.